today's tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to make a double brim beanie. So as you can see, it's knit both sides, and I'm going to show you how to knit the Latvian braid. So this tutorial goes along with this new hat design that I made. However, you can use these techniques for anything you want, really. So to get started, I'm going to cast on with some waste yarn and some number 5mm needles. However, you can use whatever yarn and needles you like. So I'm going to take the tail of my yarn and I'm going to wrap it around my needle 10 times. This piece of yarn gives me an estimate of how much yarn I need for 10 stitches. So I'm going to cast on about 50. I will be using the long tail cast on, however you can use whichever cast on you like. I do want to mention for the double brim beanie, I'm going to cast on with some waste yarn first, and then I will begin knitting with my main color. And for the Latvian braid, you are going to need 2 colors of yarn, and you do want an even number of stitches to make the braid properly. Okay, so I ended up casting on 60 stitches, so I'm just going to cut my waste yarn, and I'm going to bring in my main color of yarn. And I'm also going to grab a stitch marker to mark the beginning of my round. I'm going to go into my first stitch as if to knit, and then I'm going to grab my main color of yarn over here and I'm going to bring it in. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to knit all of my stitches. Okay, so now before I officially join in the round, I'm just going to lay my work down. Before you join in the round, you want to make sure that all your stitches are pointing to the inside of your needles. I don't want them to be like this. You want them all nicely to be like this. If you do not, you will have your round twisted and you will have to start over. So I'm just going to carefully pick up my needles, and I'm going to knit the first stitch, and the next stitch, and the next. I'm just going to pull on my tails, just tighten everything up. Okay, so I've officially joined in the round. You should have something that looks like this. Now all you're going to do is you're going to keep knitting around and around until your work from the cast on edge, which would be your waste yarn, is double what you want your brim to be. So if you want your brim to be 2 inches long, you're going to want your work to be 4 inches. If you want your brim to be 3 inches long, you're going to want to knit 6 inches, and so on. So I'm just going to keep knitting around and around, and I'll meet you back when I have about an inch or so knit. Okay, so I've knit a few rounds here, and obviously this will make a really small brim, but this is just for a demonstration only. So I'm going to grab a spare set of needles, and I'm going to slowly unpick my waste yarn and pick up my stitches to knit. So the right leg of my stitch right here, it has some yarn running through it, so I'm going to grab the right leg and I'm just going to pull the yarn out. I'm going to go to the next stitch, pick up the right leg. Oh, my yarn's going this way. remove the yarn, and I will just grab the stitch that it's in. I'm just picking up my stitches with a smaller needle because I like doing that better. However, you can pick it up with a needle that is the same size as the ones you're working with. You can pick it up with double pointed needles. It doesn't matter. Okay, so I've unpicked all my waste yarn. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the stitches I just picked up and I'm going to fold them into the inside of my work. Okay, so I'm going to knit the last 2 stitches of my first round here. Okay, so I did put my stitches on waste yarn. I have pushed them up so that they are on the inside of my knitting. I'm going to want to knit the last stitch of my round. I'm going to slip my marker. Now I'm going to knit the first stitch and the second stitch on the back needle together. So I'll pull off the back needle and take that stitch off, and I'll do the same with the front needle. Gonna go on the front and the back stitch. And I will knit these stitches together. I'm going to continue this for the whole round, and then I'll meet you back here at the beginning of the round to start the Latvian braid. Okay, so I just finished knitting my double brim beanie. The double brim for the beanie. So you're gonna have what looks like this. And I'm now ready to begin the braid. So I have knit to the end of my round. Here's my stitch marker. And I'm gonna knit the first stitch with my main color. And then I'm gonna come over here. I'm gonna grab a contrast color. I'm going to knit the second stitch with my contrast color. For the first row of the braid, all you're going to do is knit 1 stitch with the main color and 1 stitch with your contrast color. 5 stitches so far, so I have 1 pink, 1 contrast, 1 pink, 1 contrast, 1 pink. So I'm going to knit another one in my contrast. And I'm just going to keep going around, knitting one stitch with my main color, knitting one stitch with my contrast color, and then I will meet you back at the beginning of the round for the next one. Okay, so I have 2 stitches of the round left to knit. So I'll just knit those 2 stitches. One in my main and one in my contrast. And I will slip my marker. Okay, so this is what I have. This is what you want to have. And now, oops, I'll hold my marker in place so it doesn't drop off. I'm going to bring both of my yarn balls to the front of my work. And I'm going to bring both of the yarns in between my needles. Okay. This next step is really important. So I'm going to go into the first stitch as if to purl, and I'm going to grab my main yarn, my main color, and I'm going to purl the first stitch. I will now drop the main color yarn. Now, grabbing from underneath, I'm going to grab my contrast color. I'm going to purl this next stitch. So main color with main color, contrast with contrast. Now I'm going to drop it. I will now pick up my main color from underneath and purl. I'm now going to drop it. Pick up my contrast from underneath and I'm going to purl. So this is what it's looking like. My work's a little all over for tension, don't mind. Let's just pull on some tails here and tighten this up a bit. There, that looks more like it should. Okay, so this is what I have started. And you're gonna see that your yarn's gonna start to twist, and that's exactly what you want. You want it to twist. You do not want to untwist the yarn. We will untwist the yarn on the next round. So I'm just going to go around purling main color with main color, contrast color with contrast color, and I'm just going to keep pulling up my yarn from underneath the color I was just using. And then I will meet you back at the start of the round. Okay, so I have 2 stitches left for my round, so I'll just finish those 2 off. So I'm going to grab my yarn from underneath, purl with my pink, grab my yarn from underneath, and purl with my like beige yarn here. I'm going to slip my marker. Now, for the first stitch only of round 2, I'm going to grab my yarn from underneath and purl the first stitch. All other stitches afterwards, I'm going to grab yarn from on top. So I have my pink on top. I'm going to grab yarn right on top, and my yarn should start untwisting as I purl around. So you're just going to be grabbing the yarn and twisting it in the opposite direction, so you should be untwisting your yarn. Okay, so I have 2 stitches left for my round, so I'll just finish those 2 off. So I'm going to grab my yarn from underneath, purl with my pink, grab my yarn from underneath, and purl with my like beige yarn here. I'm going to slip my marker. Now for the first stitch only of round 2, I'm going to grab my yarn from underneath and purl the first stitch. All other stitches afterwards, I'm going to grab yarn from on top. So I have my pink on top. I'm going to grab yarn right on top, and my yarn should start untwisting as I purl around. So you're just going to be grabbing the yarn and twisting it in the opposite direction, so you should be untwisting your yarn. So I finished my braid. Here's what it looks like, and then I'm just going to knit a few more stitches so you can see exactly what you should have. Oops, and I dropped my marker, so I'll put my marker back on my needles, and I'm just going to knit a few stitches just to show you what's going on. Okay, and here is my finished braid. There we go. Okay, so I just thought I'd bring in the original hat and just give you a close-up of the braid. And you can see on the one side, here's what it looks like with my double brim, and here's what it looks like on top of my color work here. And then as you continue knitting, it'll just have a very smooth look to it. You won't actually really see these purl bumps hardly. So anyways, that's how you knit the double brim for this hat and the Latvian braid.